This is the Distinctly Detroit podcast, the only pod that explores why one wants to be in the D. I am your host, Feodorship III, the director of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. Join me as I interview students, scholars, leaders, and innovators about living, working, and loving in Detroit. Welcome back to the season 4 of the Distinctly Detroit podcast. Today's guest earned his A.B. in philosophy with high distinction from the University of Michigan, his M.A. in sociology from Stanford University, and his Ph.D. in organizational behavior from the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. He is the Gilbert and Ruth Whitaker Professor of Business Administration at the Ross School of Business and a Professor of Sociology with the University of Michigan. Our guest is also a faculty director at the Ross Business Plus Impact program that has the vision to serve and empower the community through the lens of business with one initiative that equips entrepreneurs. Please help us welcome Professor Jerry Davis.
Great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you for coming on board. Glad to have you here.
Delighted that you had invited me down. I'm always excited to be at the Detroit Center.
Welcome. So where are you originally from?
So I grew up in Plymouth. I was born in Florida. My dad, I have to go all the way back. All my grandparents moved to Detroit to make their fortune in the auto industry. So both my grandfathers were welders at Highland Park and then at the Rouge plant. Parents grew up in Southwest, and then my dad got into the Navy during the Second World War and spent 20 years in the Navy. I was born in Florida at a Navy base, and as soon as he got out, they had to move back. Not had to, but wanted to, of course. Okay. And so I grew up in Plymouth.
All right, Plymouth. So what prompted you, or what went into the process of you deciding to attend the University of Michigan for your undergrad year?
Yeah, I actually didn't initially go to college. I had a bunch of really terrible jobs. I worked in a bar in Plymouth for 3 years. I worked at a sad factory in Livonia. I dug sewers in Virginia Beach. So I had a series of terrible jobs that led me to conclude that I should go to college. So I started at community college at Schoolcraft and then transferred to the University of Michigan. And this is going to be either inspiring or cautionary tale. The reason I went, or maybe it'll get me in trouble, the reason I went to the University of Michigan is my dad was on the staff and he had a carpool that went there. And so it was the only university where I could still live with my parents and commute to college and get a philosophy and psychology degree. So I managed to make it through college without any debt by living with my parents and commuting to college, which is not, it turns out that I lucked out because the University of Michigan turns out to be pretty good for a commuting distance university. And it just opened up so many opportunities for me because I went to the University of Michigan. I was sort of a credible candidate for grad schools like Stanford. And so it kind of worked out.
So one would obviously describe your situation or experience as a non-traditional experience at the school. How did you enjoy your experience at Michigan? Were you able to take advantage of any of the typical college stuff, or were you just kind of all business about it, on campus, off, trying to catch a ride?
No, that's exactly the right question because I showed up at college during business hours. Showed up at 8. I went to the Central Campus Rec Building, took a swim, took a shower, and started my day that way. And then I was just there till 5, and then we drove home. So I didn't live in a dorm or have the normal college experience. It was just the class part, which I guess is good from an experimental point of view. I could tell you what's important about college, the socializing part or the classes part. All I got was the classes part for the most part, and then studied. But it did expose me to faculty and opportunities that I wouldn't have seen elsewhere. So highly recommend it if you're thinking about going to college. Highly recommend the University of Michigan because honestly, one of my best experiences there was that I had a TA in my class on organizational psychology named Tom Diano. and he really cared about his students. He took our work really seriously, and he would meet with me outside of class and say, "What are you going to do with yourself?" And I said, "I don't know, go to law school." He said, "The world does not need any more lawyers. You should do something different from that." And he really took an interest in me as a person, and in my, by the way, his wife was a lawyer. He took a real interest in me as a person, got to know me, and said, "You really belong in academia." And I said, "I don't know if that's such a good idea. I'm not sure that I'm a good fit with that. What if I hate it? Seems like a big commitment." He goes, "Tell you what, I know some faculty at the Institute for Social Research. I'm going to give you 4 names. Just go meet with all of them. One of them will give you a job, or at least a volunteer opportunity, and you can see if, what professors do is a good bet for you." So I went door to door, knocked on people's doors. Rick Price let me in and said, "Yeah, I have some opportunities for you. We don't have any money, but you can volunteer here." So I got a job as a waiter to keep myself fed, and then volunteered doing research at the Institute for Social Research, and did that for a year. And they were willing to write me letters of recommendation that lied about how much talent and intelligence I had, and that got me into grad school.
Okay.
And the rest is history.
So that's what me and my crack research team, as we were combing through your background, we saw, we think there was like a 3-year gap between when you graduated from undergrad and when you went to grad school. Is that accurate?
Just a 1-year gap.
Just a 1 year
So 1
gap.
year, and then I got a
Okay.
master's in 1987.
Okay.
At kind of along the way at Stanford.
At Stanford. Okay. So what went into your decision? How'd you choose Stanford?
Yeah, this is also going to be embarrassing, but I shared an office with a graduate student in sociology who grew up in California. I applied to 3 schools in California, and then Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, and Yale. And 3 of those are in cold places, and 3 of them are in warm places. And I have to say, once I got admitted to graduate schools, Michigan was very nice to me, and they offered me a lovely scholarship. And I flew out to visit Stanford in Palo Alto, California in March, and there was no turning back.
Man, that's just not fair.
I left
You
in
went
my
out-
winter coat.
Yeah.
I arrived there, and people were wearing shorts on their skateboards in this beautiful campus, and it smelled like flowers. And I said, "Okay, that's going to be hard to beat." So, and it turned out it was a pretty good school. So I cannot regret going to Stanford for 5 years. It's a great place to live, incredibly expensive, but I had a pretty nice time there. We like to say I've lived back there a couple of times on sabbatical, and every time we come back, we have the same reaction, which is in California, the physical climate is warm and the emotional climate is cold. And in Michigan, the opposite is true. Because as soon as we came back, everyone was nice again. it just feels really different. The moment we would like walk into a store or encounter people on the street, here they're warm. Like the emotional tone is just a lot more welcoming. I don't know.
Yeah. No, similar experience. I used to recruit for the University of Michigan in undergrad.
Yeah.
And my younger sister got in undergrad, but she also got into Stanford. And she went to go visit Stanford. She went to Stanford for undergrad, and she ended up coming back to Michigan for law school. But with like that visit, she was like, "No, it's too beautiful, she made it work." But I was hurt. I really wanted her to go to Michigan for undergrad, but Stanford is a great school, a great draw.
Yeah.
So I understand that pull.
Well, I'm glad she made it back to Michigan for law school. At least she got to spend some time in an emotionally warm place, so that's good. But it does smell really good out there. I have to say. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but they've got all these eucalyptus trees around, and it's just, it smells really good. I mean, Smart Alex would say it kind of smells like hand cream or the Body Shop or something. But that's okay. But it does feel a little bit like a bubble detached from reality.
But the program you studied at Stanford is no longer available. They no longer offer an MA in philosophy in sociology. And that leads to the question of about, a lot of the debt that a lot of Americans have these days is in grad school.
Yeah.
And a lot of these programs, people get masters and PhDs in humanities. How do you reconcile the debt load with the opportunities that people have on the other side?
That's a really that's a very prickly question. So we should just skip that one and move on. No, it's that is exactly the right question to be thinking about. So I didn't actually go. I went to a doctoral program in business where we had a full ride, so tuition and a tiny stipend, which just you weren't even born, I think, when I went out there. It's 1985, and the financial aid was
Very kind of you.
$700 a month. $700
Yeah.
a month. So we were not. I was driving a
Cost of attendance was a whole lot
1974
different.
Ford Maverick, and I could just afford the insurance because I claimed I was still in Michigan. Don't arrest me now for this, but we, was not living opulently. But I did get to leave with no debt. And so I was there for 5 years. The master's degree in sociology was kind of like a consolation prize for taking a lot of classes in the sociology department.
Okay.
But it was en route to getting a PhD in business. And that one I can recommend because there's still a ton of faculty jobs in business schools. At this point, 1 in 5 graduates with an undergraduate degree studies business. So the demand for faculty with business degrees is still going to be high, but it's a lot harder for the humanities, and it's starting to get trickier for the social sciences as well. So after the financial crisis in 2008, that felt like a bit of a punctuation point where, if students don't want to study the humanities, if they don't either major in it or take courses in it, it's going to be really hard to get to have faculty jobs to teach classes that nobody wants to take. And I was a philosophy major. My daughter was a humanities major at Stanford, but there aren't that many of them. I mean, she would routinely have classes with 12 students, and so just the demand for faculty, for teaching faculty, is such that it's going to be pretty hard to get through a humanities PhD and even many social sciences PhDs with a lot of optimism about getting a faculty job. So that's a long way of saying going into a lot of debt to get a graduate degree in some fields, you want to think long and hard about that. And I feel bad saying that out loud because there are many applications, for humanities and for social sciences, but the job market's pretty tough out there. If students are studying business, computer science, they used to study pre-law, which is where we humanity majors could hang out, but that seems less prevalent now. So it's kind of a tricky time for the liberal arts broadly.
So one would say going from sociology and philosophy to business is a big transition. How did you make that transition or decision? Because my research staff referred to it as going to the dark side. So how did you make that decision?
Yeah, that's the way that I thought about it as well. So to be honest, I had no particular interest in business. I can say this now because I have tenure, and so they're not going to fire me for this. I had no particular interest in business per se when I went to a PhD program in business, and I didn't really know that much about it. But doctoral education in business schools is really different from an MBA program. And it's really not interested in giving practical tips for setting up an enterprise resource planning system or how to create a portfolio or something like that. It's really not about the practical parts. It's really about the research parts, and that appealed to me. My advisor, the teaching assistant who took a genuine interest in me, Tom, said, the thing is that if you study organizational behavior, organization studies, you can study almost any topic as long as you use the word organization in it. So it's like in the olden days going to Disneyland with an e-ticket. You could kind of get on all the rides. And so if you say, I study organizations, you can study decision-making and how individuals think about decisions. You can study groups and their diversity and their performance. You can study corporations. You can study nation states and mergers. I actually was part of a book that studied organization theory and how you might prevent nuclear war using our insights about business organizations. And so in some sense, being in organization behavior in a business school meant that like all the rides were open. I could study individuals, I could study neural networks, or I could study, international international relations or corporate networks, and all of that was allowed. And because I'm a bit undisciplined in my interests, this meant I could kind of get away with anything. I could write studies, lab studies of people making decisions. I could study big archival analyses of social networks. I could study international comparisons of business, uh, and no one would stop me. So, in some sense, that field in a business school was um, was kind of a license to do whatever I wanted, and then teach some classes in business. So, implausibly enough, the business school was the most forgiving place, or the place where I had the most freedom to study what I wanted.
Yeah.
So it is the dark side, but it's a pretty good dark side.
Well, the way you describe it is, you really got my attention because, the transition from sociology to business organizational study seems very natural. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like a simple enough transition when you put it that way.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. I think a lot of people are scared off about business because of the quantitative component.
Yeah.
How did that play in for you, or how did you overcome that aspect of it? Or are you just really good with numbers?
I'm actually really good with numbers, so
Okay.
so it helped that I'm a bit of a nerd. I've always been pretty good with math, and so I was not too scared off by by statistics or by the mathematical aspects. I'm a data nerd, and I think it's genetic because my son is a serious data nerd. He worked on Bernie Sanders' campaign in the national office doing data stuff. He writes a column for The Guardian in the UK, analyzing voter data. And I think there might be some strange genetic component where just a particular brain for data. So for me, I was in my element with the data part. And that also fits with quantitative sociology. So there's a real pretty good overlap there. So I wasn't too scared off by that. I was a bit more scared off by some of the minutiae of business because I had no actual business background before going to business school. And so I ended up having to sort of teach myself, during grad school, accounting and finance and some of the basics of business so that I could understand, what's on a company's 10K and how do I calculate free cash flow. And it ended up being useful, but I kind of feel that I take a sociological approach to business topics. And so that the theory is really about society. And, my last book was about corporate power and where that comes from and how it's enacted. But to be able to do that, I really need to be able to dig into, giant databases of corporate information and analyze patterns there. So.
Okay. Well, you just you predicted my next question was you recently wrote a book about containing corporate power in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Many people would argue that we don't live in a democracy or a republic. We really live in an oligarchy. What are your views on that? How does American corporate power kind of affect this country, and particularly in Detroit? How do you see manifestations of that?
Yeah, great question. Agreed on the oligarchy point. It's really interesting. So the book that I was writing was about new forms of corporate power. So in Detroit, we are very familiar with the power of a General Motors. Like, it was so obvious that power was concentrated in 3 giant auto companies that provided most of the jobs and most of the mobility. And if you had to tell the story of the 20th century and the creation of the middle class in the US, Detroit was the epicenter for this. Like I mentioned, my grandparents moving to Detroit to make their fortune. Like my father's father, grew up on a farm in Indiana, got drafted into the Army during the First World War. And when he got out, he's like, I'm not going back to the farm. I'm moving to Detroit to make my fortune. So in 1919, he moved to Detroit, got a job at Highland Park, making Model Ts. And he worked at Ford till the late 60s, so almost 50 years. And the entire pathway of living on family farm to living in a sophisticated city, and owning a car and owning your own home and being able to provide for your kids, raising your kids and they can be better off than you. That is such a Detroit story. Like the story of the Great Migration is escaping from the Jim Crow South to opportunity in places like Detroit. And so this was the land of opportunity, and it was created by giant, powerful corporations who were reined in by antitrust laws and by a powerful union movement that we've recently seen activated again. That was really the combination that created opportunity in the middle class in the US. We had big, powerful corporations, but we had countervailing power, a powerful union movement, and societal norms that made them behave themselves, that made them contribute to the growth of the middle class and upward mobility, so that you could genuinely hire in on the line at Highland Park and sort of work your way up. You might not be executive vice president, but there was some mobility there. And the flip side of that is if you become too reliant on a small number of giant corporations, if they're your only source of mobility, then you're vulnerable to shocks. So if in 1962, GM's market share was over 50% of the auto market in the US. That's crazy. It could be very profitable, and it's great if you're in that tent, if you're part of the union, or have a good white collar job in the auto industry. This is great. But when the industry changes and you become too reliant on these big corporations, that's kind of how we saw the middle class become decimated in Detroit and beyond. So in 1950, it turns out that Flint was the highest wage city in the United States.
Wow.
Like 1950, Flint was the land of opportunity, just boundless growth. Anybody could move there and make a pretty good living. Not as much anymore. I think all of the 5 biggest employers in Flint now are in healthcare. Thankfully, because the UAW Retirement Trust provides health benefits to their many retirees. So there's jobs in healthcare in Flint, but it's not a GM town the way that it used to be. So that was one flavor of corporate power, was giant companies that employed hundreds of thousands of people for life, provided them a retirement plan, provided healthcare and retirement. That was a flavor of corporate power that we understood how to rein that in through antitrust, through regulations of the capital markets and the labor markets, the Wagner Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. And of course, the growth of the UAW, like we had evolved a system that allowed big corporate power, but created constraints around it and pointed it in a direction that served the population more broadly. So that was a long story of the 20th century, and the rise and decline of Detroit was the decline of those companies has been bad news. What's different now is that the powerful companies are all in technology, and they're all on the West Coast. So Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, now Meta, maybe Tesla, maybe NVIDIA, but a handful of tech companies are, I would say, far more powerful than big corporations were in the 20th century, and a lot harder to beat into shape. So hardly anybody works at those companies. They have surprisingly small employment roles. They pay very well, but a company like Alphabet or Google, most of the people that work there are actually not employees of the company. They are temps, vendors, and contractors, or TVCs as they're known locally. And so it's just an explicitly temporary job. This is not a career where you're going to work your way up in the company. It doesn't have that same flavor of job security. So they're powerful in I think a different way. They're organized in a way that doesn't create quite the same pathways of opportunities, and they're just a lot smaller than the big automakers are. So that was the thing that I was trying to crack, was to better understand how is corporate power in the 21st century, where it's organized around tech, different from 20th century corporate power of something like a GM or a Ford or a Chrysler or an AT&T. So anyway, that was a
Yeah.
much longer
Well,
answer than you were looking for.
No, that was great. That was great. I talk all day about it, but brought another question to mind to me is, what about the financial side? What about the investors, the Black Rocks,
Yeah.
and those groups? How does that corporate power or even that financial capital power, how is that playing out these days?
Yeah, I feel like I should give you a 30-minute timer so you can take a nap while I talk for 30 minutes about
No.
those topics. So I wrote a book in 2009 called Managed by the Markets, How Finance Reshaped America. And it was about the topic of financialization and how companies went from making things to creating shareholder value and how that sort of reshaped society in the US. And my big concern was that financial markets had become really central, that normal households, instead of getting a corporate pension that gave you a guaranteed check every month, they had 401ks, and not everybody was paying attention or contributing enough. So they're going to find themselves in retirement without enough money to retire on, in any reasonable fashion. What's happened since then is that I used to be very anxious about, a Goldman Sachs or financial institutions having too much power. And what's interesting was, like, in 2008, in the beginning, we had 5 big investment banks: Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Lehman Brothers, and Bear Stearns. And by the end of the year, we only had 2, which was Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. One of them Merrill Lynch was in financial trouble and got acquired by Bank of America, and the other 2 evaporated. You have to think, well, if they're so powerful, why are they dead?
That's a good point.
And so something about that system was shifting. And I would say, all right, this is going to be nerd stuff, but I came to a realization that the big theme in my work was that information and communication technologies, like spreadsheets, the World Wide Web, smartphones, had this transformational effect on all of the things that it takes to create a business. So how do you raise the money you need for your business, and who has ownership and control? How do you connect with labor? How do you distribute to customers? How do you work with suppliers? That all of these things have been transformed by technologies, and in ways that seem to disempower or alter the original sources of power. So finance used to be powerful because there were only a few banks that could raise money in enough bulk to underwrite, a Ford stock offering or something like that. And that's no longer especially true. There's a lot of ways to raise money that don't involve going to an investment bank. So we used to think that Goldman Sachs was, a vampire squid, this incredibly powerful institution that controlled the world and had incredible access. Now all the news stories you read about Goldman Sachs are, they're having some issues. And they announced a few years ago that they wanted to be the low-cost provider on Wall Street, and they were going to use technology to take out some of the employment costs of being a bank. And those are all euphemisms for we're not going to be quite as remunerative an employer as we might have been in the past. It was really sort of signaling that there was a fundamental transformation, in the nature of investment banking. That it used to be powerful in 2005, but now maybe investment banking isn't quite the power center that it was. And I would say that what we're seeing there and in many other sectors is a transformation to information technology companies. So if Apple decided to become a bank tomorrow, if Amazon decided to become a bank tomorrow, if that were legally possible, and if that made sense for them strategically, they're going to be so much more powerful than a Goldman Sachs could be, or maybe even a JP Morgan Chase. like think about what Amazon knows about you. I imagine you're an Amazon customer.
Yes. Yes.
I think everybody is.
Yes, I am. I have an Echo. I have one. Yeah,
You got
Alexa's in my house.
primes.
Yeah.
They know they can do tests on ads to say, Fiotis, we noticed that when we offer you this thing with an orange box around it, you're a lot more likely to click on it. Or Fiotis, we've noticed that that
Scary.
you are, if something is advertised as 30% off, you're a lot more likely to buy it than when it's just it has a nice ad behind it. So Amazon knows a lot about us, and they know a lot about our willingness to pay at the moment. They know more about me than I do, I think. So imagine that they wanted to get into the finance business. They're going to know a lot more about me than JP Morgan Chase does. And so
They can tailor their loans and their pitch. They can say, we offer him just a quarter percentage lower, he'll take it.
exactly.
They'll know exactly where to go with it. That's
think about that.
scary.
It's so like the source of power now feels like access to information and knowing how to process it and what to do with it. And so if that's the source of power, it kind of makes sense why it's Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook that have so much power, because that the data that they have enables them to do things that other companies can't. Okay, I have a crazy thing that one of my colleagues in finance told me about, Andrew Wu. So imagine, I don't know if you noticed this, but during the pandemic, a lot of restaurants, either they shifted to doing takeout or delivery only, or if you come in and sit down, like Jolly Pumpkin, a couple of blocks from here, they don't have waiters or waitresses. You don't order in front. You sit down at the table and you scan a QR code and then put in your information. And then whenever you're done, they say, okay, you want to pay, click, click.
Yeah.
And then you're done. And then the food will show up, and whenever you're ready, you can get up and go. And so they don't need as many people to operate the restaurant anymore. You don't get that warm interaction with human beings anymore. You are interacting with a QR code in your phone.
Yeah.
If you're a sullen loner like me, that's fine. Not all of us like human interaction, but it really changes the profile of the business. But the company that is tracking the orders from the QR code to the kitchen, they know exactly how many truffle fries or margarita pizzas or Reuben sandwiches they're selling at this restaurant. They know exactly what the texture of the sales looks like. Think if they decided to go into the banking business, said, hey, Jolly Pumpkin, do you want to open up a line of credit with us? We know about your cash flows. We have good insights into how your business operates. We're willing to cut you a deal on a loan that might be more tailored to you, as you said, than a commercial bank where somebody has to show up and ask you to fill out paperwork. So in some sense, information, just that level of information and intermediation really changes the nature of how the economy works in a way that favors those big informational intermediaries like Alphabet, Google, and Apple. They just know so much information that can be used to do business or shape the way business is done. That's a flavor of power we've never seen before. So anyway.
No, it's very fascinating to me. I hope our listeners are really, leaning in. Like
those three that are still awake.
Well, we only have 10, but so no, it's we're still building it up. But so let me transition just a little bit. You're in charge of the Ross School's Business Plus Impact Program.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? And does your work with this program speak to your background in sociology? And is this kind of a culmination of things, of your work to this point?
Yeah, thank you for that. That is a lovely question. Yeah, the point of the Business Plus Impact Initiative, I will refer to it as sometimes being the do-gooding part of the business school, which sounds disrespectful to myself, but that's okay. The premise behind it is that we have a lot of good ideas at the University of Michigan. We have super smart students. We have great faculty and doctoral research, graduate student research. And it would be great if we could figure out some way to translate that into usable tools and insights in the real world. And particularly when it comes to business, there's a lot that the university has to offer that, but we don't necessarily have a mechanism to translate that into practical insights that regular people can use, and particularly when it comes to business. So I just described, one of my colleagues saying, if you run a restaurant IT business that's translating, orders from QR codes to the kitchen, that's a great opportunity to go into finance. Like, wow, that's a brilliant idea. I'm not sure that normal people in the restaurant industry or in banking are going to know about that. So how do we get ideas? Can we turn that into something that will best serve the interests of people and communities? And so the Business Plus Impact Initiative, we launched something called the Impact Studio, which is both a course and an incubator for student-led businesses. And the idea is, how do we take insights from the university and make them accessible to businesses and communities in places like Detroit? So the Impact Studio course for the last couple of years has been focused on enabling Detroit-based entrepreneurs to create businesses for the green energy transition.
Okay.
Last week there was a great conference here in Detroit at Michigan Central, organized by Carla Walker Miller and Walker Miller Energy Services here in Detroit, about business opportunities for Black and Brown founders in the green energy transition. It's a great conference full of insights, and just hats off to them for organizing it. And they were working from the same insight, I think, that we had, which is the Biden-Harris administration has opened up a giant spigot of cash for green energy businesses specific to cities like Detroit. So if you want to replace your gas furnace, 25 years old like mine, with a heat pump, you can get a $2,000 tax credit and up to $8,000 in rebates to get rid of your old gas furnace and put in an electric heat pump, which is way more efficient. If you want to put on solar panels, you can get 30% tax break. So the Inflation Reduction Act and other legislation, they are full of opportunities for small businesses. If you're an electrician, you can start planning your retirement now, because there's so much business for electricians right now. The world needs trained electricians to help electrify the economy.
The world needs trained electricians.
100%. If you have an interest in a career, electrician, find an apprenticeship program, look up the IBEW, and find some way to get into an electrician training. If you're not coming to the University of Michigan, become an electrician, because we need electric power charging stations. We need solar panel installation, geothermal. That's not really for electricians. We need much more heat pumps for heating and cooling, heat pump based water heaters. There's just so much need and so much government money to fund this. Like the Biden-Harris administration has, they've authorized something like $369 billion for energy and pollution abatement. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Justice 40 initiative, but it's an executive order that Biden signed in 2021, said that 40% of federal spending on things like this should benefit under-resourced communities. And Detroit counts. So there's specific targeting of business opportunities for Detroiters. If you're a homeowner, you can get, there's just a ton of resources available for moving your house toward electrification, weatherization, make sure that there's no holes in your roof and things like that. And that means like business opportunities for entrepreneurs in Detroit. So if you've got electrical training, plumbing, there's a lot of relevant trade skills. If you're in the construction industry, there's just a ton of opportunities. But the opportunity that we saw at Business Plus Impact and the Impact Studio was, if I'm an electrician, I don't have the time to read through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is hundreds of pages long, and look up all of these programs and understand how that's going to affect me. What the University of Michigan can do, and particularly the business school, is translate all of that legislation and innovations around the building blocks of business and make them accessible to small businesses and entrepreneurs in places like Detroit. So when we teach this Impact Studio course, we get 40 to 50 graduate students, and we set them to work translating the Inflation Reduction Act and innovations in research that the faculty are working on, turn them into usable insights that a small business person could read and use. So greenbiztransition.com, it's a website that contains several dozen entries written by our students to help business people walk through, like, how do I get health insurance? What is a CDFI? And how do I use one to raise funds for my business? How can I take advantage of the tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act to run my business? So, and as you were here a couple of months ago, we did an event for Detroit-based entrepreneurs. 130 of them signed up to come to this half-day workshop here at the Detroit Center at Mack and Woodward to walk through what are some of those basics of starting a business, and how do I take these opportunities from the Inflation Reduction Act and other innovations in technology to create my business and grow my business. It was a very long answer. Sorry about that.
This is great. I think this is a great opportunity for people to learn and look some things up and get some tips. I think this is awesome. I mean, what you all are doing is, again, you're providing opportunity for people to learn. And what I heard you say is you're taking this big government bill and distilling it down, highlighting it for people, making it digestible, easier to process and understand. And you're giving students the opportunity to learn and grow and learn about businesses and provide insights. So it's a win for the school for providing opportunity. It's a win for the entrepreneurs to get support. And it's a win for the students because they get to learn hands-on with an actual business.
Yes, thank you. That was exactly it. That is sort of that is the entire theory, is that we can do something where everybody benefits. The university doesn't always have the best history in interacting with Detroit. Every now and then they might show up in a bus with air-conditioned bus with kids wearing matching T-shirts to pull weeds from a vacant lot or something like that. We really went into this in Business Plus Impact with the Impact Studio, with the idea that it's going to be mutually beneficial for everybody involved. So the first thing that the students do in the class is we interview 40 to 50 community members and small business people to ask them about what are their concerns and pain points and issues when it comes to energy. But if we're going to take 30 or 40 minutes of their time, we want to make sure they get paid for it. So everybody gets $50 to record a Zoom call. So you're not going to live off that, but what we wanted to signal was this is going to be mutually beneficial. That their insights are worth something. We've recruited some community members to help serve as experts. They come in, they read the students' work and say, that's not going to work, or think about this. But we have sort of Detroiters giving the students insights about how to make sure that their business ideas and the guidance that they're coming up with is well-grounded and genuinely useful. And of course, they're compensated for that. And it makes the product better. And I think it provides a benefit, we hope, to the community. And it provides, as you said, a benefit to the student. They get to see the impact of their work in the real world. Like if they come up with a really useful guide for how to access this tax credit, that's kind of gold. That's better than just, I did well on the test. I've helped, now the people in Fitzgerald are a little bit closer to getting a district geothermal installed or something like that.
No, I mean, that's important to be able to go into an interview. I tell students all the time is to being able to quantify and qualify your work. I worked on a project and we were able to help 35 Detroit community members get geothermal. And that means something, and that tells an employer something. So that what you were doing is great work. And appreciate the opportunity to share with folks.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to transition real quick to what we call our lightning round.
All right.
This is a series of questions we ask every guest, and it's more about your interaction and engagement with the city of Detroit.
Yeah.
The first question is, what's your Coney order? What do you order when you go to a Coney Island restaurant?
I'm a vegetarian. So, sorry about that. I would order the fries and then watch the other people eat the coney. And I do not have a stance on the Lafayette versus American. I am scrupulously neutral.
Yeah. We're Detroit one over here, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, all right. Detroit Vegan Soul. That's where I'm going to go for if they have a coney.
Okay. Who is your favorite Detroit athlete?
It's got to be Miggy.
Okay. Vernors or Canada Dry?
Vernors, come on. That's a trick question.
Yeah,
but I noticed that you had Canada Dry in the kitchen here, so I'm just going to say...
Someone's getting talked about later. Better Made or Lay's chips?
Oh, Better Made.
Okay. Deep dish or pan style pizza?
Deep dish.
Okay.
Buddy specifically.
Favorite Detroit sports team?
Pistons.
Okay. And second to last question, favorite place to go in the city?
Wow. Underappreciated gem is the Ford Piquette plant on Piquette Street. So if you take the Q line to, I think, Amsterdam, it was the Ford Motor Company's second factory in the city on Piquette Street. And it's where the Model T was invented. And it's like underappreciated gem. I've been there probably 20 times. I've taken class tours there. We had a bunch of historians in town in March. I took them all down there on a tour. I love the Ford Piquette plant. If you haven't been there, Piquette. And I think they're open year round. Take the tour. It's like if you're a car nerd or you're a history guy.
Yes.
Have you been to the Piquette plant?
I have not.
Good. All right.
Yes.
We are taking these microphones off. We're going to get on the Q line across the street, and we're going to go down to the Ford Piquette plant and tour this thing. It's amazing. They've probably got 50 Model Ts in all different configurations. Every car that was built at that, dude. Fiodas, you have to go. You have to go to the Ford Piquette plant.
It's my favorite Ford line. So you can get any Model T any color you want, as long as it's black.
That's exactly right. You can see those there, and you can see all the stuff that people turned them into, like the first snowmobile that somebody made out of a Model T, and the first tractor made out of. Well, maybe not the first, but it's oh my gosh, you have a treat waiting for you.
Putting it on the list. Put that on the list. Last question is, where can we find you?
You can find me on at my website. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Blue Sky. Both of those are Vanishing Corp. And later today, you can find me on Willis Avenue in my lovely loft overlooking downtown.
Right. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Jerry Davis, U of M professor in the Ross School of Business, leader of the Ross Impact Plus studio and program, and Detroit resident and innovator and entrepreneur supporter and just community advocate. We thank you very much for your time and blessing us and gracing us with your presence.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Clarification, the leader of the Impact Studio is Lauren Towns Jr.
Oh, okay.
I'm just the enabler, a Business Plus Impact faculty director.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. And again, this is the Distinctly Detroit podcast. You can get us anywhere you get your pods. Please like, subscribe, and check us out. Thank you again. We'll see you next time. This has been the Distinctly Detroit podcast. This is a production of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. You can find us anywhere you get your pods. Please like, subscribe, and rate us. This podcast is executive produced by Marlon Franklin, edited by Aranza Stanton, and written by Shaylin Jones and Fioda Ship III.